Regardless of whether our decisions are or are not predetermined, I don't think free will makes any sense. Non-determinists who espouse the idea of free will seem to think that when the will takes an action, nothing causes the will to take that action, but the taking of that action is not a chance event either. Often they will also deny that it is merely a combination of determinism and chance. Rather, they believe that there is some third option, and that it's a false dichotomy to say that the only options are chance and determinism. However, I've never heard an explanation of what this third option is that doesn't sound like either determinism, chance, or some combination of the two. As Sam Harris says, either our wills are determined by prior causes and we are not responsible for them, or they are the product of chance and we are not responsible for them. Often those who believe in free will say that if we have no free will, then deterrence will have no effect on people's behavior, so we might as well do away with the penal system. But I think the opposite is true. Employing deterrence on a society presupposes that there is some causal relationship between deterrence and behavior. If there were no such relationship, how could the threat of punishment have any effect? Proponents of free will often appeal to our subjective experience. They often say that it doesn't seem like we are forced to make the choices we do. However, as Harris says, free will doesn't even correspond to any subjective fact about us, and introspection soon proves as hostile to the idea as the laws of physics are. Seeming acts of volition merely arise spontaneously, whether caused, uncaused, or probabilistically inclined, it makes no difference, and cannot be traced to a point of origin in our conscious minds. Quite often thoughts and inclinations will pop into our minds without giving us any clue as to where they came from or why they appeared. Even if we have an impulse and we resist that impulse, the urge to resist seems to have appeared just as spontaneously as the impulse being resisted. Harris says, the intention to do one thing and not another does not originate in consciousness. Rather, it appears in consciousness, as does any thought or impulse that might oppose it. We do not consciously decide to have a thought before we think it. Even if we consciously decide to make a decision, we didn't consciously decide to make that decision. The explanation for every decision we make can only introspectively be traced back to a thought or an impulse that seems to have popped into our minds unbidden. Harris says, I cannot decide what I will next think or intend until a thought or intention arises. What will my mental state be? I do not know. It just happens. Where is the freedom in that? Some proponents of free will say that the idea that we don't control our decisions implies that people who do bad things do them involuntarily and therefore ought not be punished. This doesn't follow. Deterrence will have an effect on some behaviors and not others. As Harris says, it makes sense to treat a man who enjoys murdering children differently from one who accidentally hit and killed a child with his car, because the conscious intentions of the former give us a lot of information about how he is likely to behave in the future. Punishment won't work to deter unavoidable accidents, so there is no point in applying punishment to people who kill accidentally. People often hit children with their cars if they run into the street, but those people are not charged with any crime unless they were driving recklessly. We also don't punish people if we judge them to be mentally incompetent. If a person has some disorder that impairs their ability to understand and respond to deterrence, then the deterrents become pointless. If they happen to be violent, it often makes sense to restrain or even imprison such people, but it would be pointless to punish them. Some philosophers like Dan Dennett believe in both determinism and free will. They call themselves compatibilists. They say that even though our thoughts and actions are determined by brain activity, which is in turn determined by prior brain activity, we can still have free will insofar as that deterministic process is not interfered with by any outside coercion. Harris's problem with this view is that to say that you are responsible for everything that goes on inside your skin because it's all you is to make a claim that bears absolutely no relationship to the feelings of agency and moral responsibility that have made the idea of free will an enduring problem for philosophy. I think the dispute between those who don't believe in free will and compatibilists is entirely semantic. The only thing about which they really disagree is what ought to be labeled as free will. When those who don't believe in free will debate those who reject determinism, they more or less agree on what they are disputing. Compatibilists don't really contribute to this debate. Rather, they engage in a distinct tangential debate. Proponents of free will sometimes cite the quantum mind hypothesis or other seemingly chance events which occur in the brain as a possible avenue for free will. However, chance occurrences are by definition ones for which I claim no responsibility, and quantum indeterminacy does nothing to make the concept of free will intelligible. One of the more naive arguments for free will accuses people who deny it of being disingenuous. They think that if you really don't believe in free will, you wouldn't really bother trying to do anything with your life, because nothing you do is really under your control. As Harris says, this is actually extremely difficult to do. Just try staying in bed all day waiting for something to happen. You will find yourself assailed by the impulse to get up and do something, which will require increasingly heroic efforts to resist. So those points are pretty much the whole book in a nutshell. The whole thing is only 96 pages, so it's a quick read.